I love that last thing you said. Why do we do church? Because we are human beings. Right? I never knew that.
Well, I got that from a movie.
Yeah.
And I was talking with was it Pam or might have been Ron Hinn? I'm, I'm not sure what his last name is. But we were talking. I was talking with somebody about how books and movies can be. We can find something that speaks to us, and that is a formative thing, like planting a seed. And somebody told me, you gave me this one thing I was looking for, Fiddler on the Roof. How do we maintain our balance? Tradition, right? Yeah, yeah, I guess so. Well,
I just listened to and watched.
You look like you have ice cream cone.
A YouTube of the man who developed the Gainesville Health and Fitness Club.
Oh, really? Yeah.
He is so inspiring, and he mentioned several books, and one being The Power of Positive Thinking.
okay.
So I encourage you to look him up and read that. Listen to that. Yeah, if you haven't, YouTube of the man who developed the Gainesville Health and Fitness. Very inspiring, as you said. And I just heard this 2 days ago. So you're reaffirming.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. All right.
You have a seminar person here.
You know, we almost had to take the front row and move it back. There's a church in Stonington, Connecticut. It was built in the 1700s. And they had a way of dealing with the front row. Well, apparently when that building was made, the entrance was next to the pulpit. So nobody was late, and well, maybe the front row might have been. That's how it got filled up. Anyway, but I think it was in probably the 50s or the 60s. They built a basement and a door at the back of the sanctuary. Well, listen, thank you for sticking around. And I thought what I'd do is I talk a little bit. I'll talk a little bit and then open it up for wherever you want to take it. And I think the common denominator here with UCG is creativity and the arts and the social gospel, social conscience. Let me just say that I was on sabbatical from UCC at the Villages back in 2017. And there were 3 parts to my sabbatical. And the first part was to go out to the Grunwald Guild in the middle of the Cascade Mountains east of Seattle. And it's so remote you can't get there from here. In other words, you get out there, and I think, let's see, something about you couldn't take a train out there. You had to take a bus. And then it would only take you as far as Leavenworth, and somebody from the Grunwald Guild would have to come out and pick you up. There's another great conference center out there called Holden Village. And apparently the Grunwald Guild was based on the concept of it. And I think both are Lutheran programs. And the guy who founded it, Richard Kemmerer, was a layperson, specialized. His media was stained glass window making. And what the Grunwald Guild became was they took the old Grange, made that the main lodge. They had a one-room schoolhouse that became the library, and then various dormitory facilities they built over time, either built or moved or whatever. And it's really an amazing place. If you get a chance, I'm sure they're wishing people would get out there. but they became a place for artists, for faith expression through art. Anyway, I had the opportunity to be an artist in residence. It wasn't the first time I went out there, but had free room and board. Had let's see, how'd that work? Anyway, so it was great. I really enjoyed it. And you had to help with the dishes. You had to help with, and I think my job was also vacuuming the main meeting room of the lodge. But I went there. I had an idea for what I wanted to do, and it was basically to do this paraphrase interpretation of the last 3 chapters of the Gospel of Mark. And so I had this room where I was able to work, this scriptorium kind of a thing. And what I did was I took what's called an interlinear, where they have the Greek text with the English root word meaning above it. So it was a translation, but it was really the nuts and bolts of the Greek with the English word. And so what I would do, I actually literally copied it all out, and then either I'd use the word that they gave, or I'd come up with a word I thought that might be a better fit. And then I strung it all together, and then it's something where I could tell, or could be read as a way to bring out the story. And so this actually became a project that I used for a Maundy Thursday service. And I had images for there were 9 episodes, each of the episodes. And I was able to put this up on the wall, tack it up on the wall. So the script that I was working on, and then I did 9 drawings to go with each episode. And one of the things, there were any number of images, and maybe I intuitively knew to look for this, but I found that women were significant in the story. They may not have been center stage, but they were at the beginning, the middle, and the end. There was the woman who anointed Jesus' hair. There was the woman who challenged Peter at the fire. And then there were the women who came to the tomb. And it made me, that was kind of the beginning of something a theme that was emerging over time. And the idea of women holding it together. Well, the next phase of by the way, I also stopped to see Tom and Amelia Boomershine, who founded the Network of Biblical Storytellers International. And around the first week of August every year, in fact, it's happening this summer, it's 40 years, in fact, this group gets together for a festival. Anyway, I was going to visit with them. And while I was with them, I remember the news came out that America was being pulled out of the Paris Accords for the environment. And that's when I realized we were in trouble. Now, I don't know if this was specifically something I was talking about with Tom, but his thesis was that the Gospel of Mark was originally a story that was told until it was written down. It's the shortest of the 4 Gospels. And there's a lot of action. Immediately, this happened, immediately, so that's kind of a motif. And talking with him about the Gospel of Mark, and maybe because of that incident, it was, I think, what prompted me to think about, well, when was the Gospel of Mark written? It was written after the terrible persecutions by Nero against the Christians. They were an easy target. Sound familiar? And there was Nero, they think Nero was involved with arson and burning down parts of Rome. He was a civil engineer before he was emperor, and so he wanted to build. And so he had this was perpetrated, and then they needed somebody to blame. And the Christians were what were they doing? They were the things that the communion and so forth were suspect. Was it cannibalism, whatever? And so the regular people were afraid. Romans were afraid of the Christians, so they gladly fed them to the lions or burned them at the stake or whatever it was. And I thought, and they killed Peter and Paul. It occurred to me that early church said, well, we're waiting for Jesus to show up. He hasn't got here yet. Our leaders, our eyewitnesses, our storytellers are dying or being killed off. We better write this down. Excuse me. And so that's where the Gospel of Mark came from. The Gospel of Mark is unique, is that it was specifically written for the people of the future. Yeah. It was written for the people of the future. Now, Luke had more of a broader audience, the world. Greek was the lingua franca of the time. And Matthew, that spoke to the Jewish Christians. And then John was dealt with whatever else was out there, because they had to be a more mystical to deal with, to contend with those other philosophies. But Mark, so that was an insight that came from there. I want to be careful I don't go too long with this. I've kind of overspent what I wanted to do. But just the same, I went from there to had a road trip. Went from Florida up to Massachusetts and back, visited with family, friends. I had the opportunity to do a storytelling program. I recited a set of stories at one of my classmates from Lancaster Seminary. And and I had met with some of the women pastors that she had been mentoring. Stu Foster, for 30 years, had been a pastor in Connecticut, mentoring women pastors in Connecticut. And we had a big barbecue. Husband did the barbecue, and so we're all talking. And later I did a presentation, and one of the women came up to me. Oh, and by the way, the women were telling me how they use Bible stories. And it was basically they'd put on a costume, they'd be a persona, be Peter's mother-in-law or Mary Magdalene or some character, usually on the outskirts telling the story. And one of the women pastors asked me, she said, "Here you are, you're a man telling these stories. Can a woman tell them with conviction? Those stories about Jesus, I said, yes, of course, but I needed a reason why. Anyway, later that week, I had the opportunity to visit with Jay O'Callahan, absolutely remarkable, one of the great treasures of storytelling. Look him up. He's fun. And he would tell these stories about growing up in the suburbs of Boston, about the characters of his neighborhood, and he was always imitating, it was me and Mrs. Beam. He called Putty, calling for a dog. Putty, we knew that Putty didn't come. And then there was Mrs. Lawrence, Bones, where's my bones? And so there was these eccentric women characters. And here's this 6-foot guy with a beard. And I thought, what's the problem, women? Come on, you can do this. Well, so I go to the Network of Biblical Storytellers Festival. That was the last piece of my sabbatical. And in a workshop, and I put the question to them. And the women pastors and storytellers said, yeah, we tell these stories all the time. And they told me the other stories they tell, or that they read, or are inspired by. The daughters of Zelophehad? It's a remarkable story. It actually would be a good proof text for reparations. Check it out. It's in Judges. And it tells about Zelophehad had died. They're out there in the wilderness, and the women come to Moses, and they said, we don't have a brother to take the inheritance. We want to claim the inheritance, and Moses takes it to, let me talk to God. So he talks to God, and God says, it's in the Bible. The women are right. And so they work that. In the Talmud, it says later, the men kind of finagle it. Well, you can't marry outside of the clan. You got to stay in, our particular family group. But that the lesson there was, it was a different question. What are the stories we need to be telling on a Sunday morning that we're not hearing? The role of women. And so then I wrote down, I made a list of as many women as I could think of in the characters, and they generally were peripheral characters, but basically the same thing that I discovered at the beginning, that women hold the Bible together. And I do have that list. I should have brought that. Now I'm thinking I should have brought that. Okay. Let's see. Well, since 2019, I've been retired from UCC at the Villages, and then COVID hit. A couple other things. Oh, by the way, yeah, this is incident. There's probably too much information, but I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and your pastor, Andy Bachman, said proton beam radiation. Do that. But I was thinking of, no, do that. So I was going to have something done locally here at Shands. But thanks to Andy being so insistent, I went up to Jacksonville and he saved my life. They saved my life too. Proton Beam Institute. What's that?
Ain't it very tasty?
And it expands on a yay, science. Okay, so, well, then, of course, COVID hit about the same time. And so then, we're seeing all this kind of stuff, this madness that's percolating even then, and the world, the terror that people were living with. And then I forget at what point, I was kind of like, well, what's next? What do I do now? And the associate conference minister at the time, I think it was Raymond Hargrove. May he be blessed. Raymond Hargrove gave me a lead. He said, in the Florida Keys, they need somebody to fill in for 4 weeks. Well, it turned out, I did remote. I did Zoom. And the previous guy, he taught me how. I did go visit them for in-person communion. So, making the run down there from Wildwood. And I think it went from 4 Sundays, it went to 4 months. I had a real good time with them. And I'll share this with you. I have something that I've developed over time, actually, an Advent and a Lenten set of stories, kind of a catechism. These are the stories I've been telling for 40 years. Anyway, if you'd like to check that out, that's right here. Head now. Okay, bye-bye.
They live in Jacksonville.
Oh, my Lord. Okay, be well, be safe. So, so that became, I now had a mission to be an artist and storyteller and set aside the regular lectionary. I got a lectionary. These are stories I've been telling that I've interpreted. And so, they made me a conch. They gave me a conch shell. So I'm official. And then, and Raymond encouraged me, don't take a church. You do what you're doing. You be kind of like a circuit rider. He didn't say that, but that's essentially what I've been doing. I've visited 12 churches, now 13, to do this kind of thing. And I've seen churches that everybody's struggling to hang on. And there are 2 of those churches that are now have closed their doors. One of them was South Shore out at south of Tampa, Sun City. I think, it was South Shore was the UCC church, and they had been 1,000 people. We had a conference there, and they were down to like 20 people, and eventually closed up. But it was a combination of COVID and politics. But kind of the grace in that story was the Jewish community they helped establish, welcomed them in with no rent. So, and anyway, so I've had a chance to work with some of the big churches. I think we're still in this phase of, and this I think has been the way we've done things for a while, kind of like silo. Everybody's kind of looking out for themselves. But you got these little churches that are hanging on, and it's like we need to be helping each other, not necessarily financially. Okay, everybody's got that problem, but in terms of can we share? What are the gifts? And so I've thought of what I'm doing as kind of a booster shot of gospel storytelling, and so let's see what else I want to say about that. And so what emerged was kind of a theme of know your narrative. Challenge. I think we UCC folks, we tend to say, oh, the Bible. Well, that's something those Baptists do. Well, everything down here is Baptist, other than the UCC. Even the Methodists are Baptists down here. But I'll tell you, it's something. And I kind of felt like I'm in kind of a territory here where Bible's a little suspect to this gang. But that's okay, because I think what I showed you today was it's okay for you to look at these stories and then see what you can find. Where's the buried treasure? Interpret it, figure it out. There's stuff there. It works dramatically. And here's some things that I've discovered.
There might be questions in here.
Yeah. I'll just get through this, and then that's why I want to give you stuff to think about. So I want you to have the anxious bench. You're ready for your questions or your conversation. Okay. Like I said, there are 40 years of stories, but there's still stuff that I've learned. And check this out. It so happens that there was, I went to okay, we're recording this? Okay. The Wild Goose Festival. You got to go. It's the Woodstock for progressive Christians. Music, the latest speakers, Diana Butler Bass, Dominic Crossan, the whole gang. Let's see. Trying to think of, they're marvelous speakers. And it rains just about no matter what time of the summer they do it, it's rain and there's mud, and so that's part of the fun.
Where is it?
It's in North Carolina. North Carolina. They changed it from being near Asheville, and now it's a little further up the line, closer to DC. But it was there that I heard Diana Butler Bass, the closing worship sermon. She talked about a colleague who was asked in seminary. She was asked to do a report on take a text and find something new, and she found a pronoun, a his instead of a her. And it was Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Martha and her sister Mary. But the way it was written was the village of Martha and his sister Mary. And what she discovered was that there had been some kind of fooling around about the 200 years after Christ. And as it turns out, there was no Martha in the Gospel of John. They borrowed Martha from Martha and Mary of Martha and Mary story in Luke. But Martha and Mary in the story in 10th chapter of Luke, there's no mention of what town. So Bethany is related to John chapter 11, and it should, and it's still in dispute, but it should be Lazarus of Bethany, the village of his sister Mary. And what she has concluded is Mary of Bethany is Mary Magdalene, and Magdalene is not a reference to a town. It's a title, like Peter the Rock, Mary the Tower. How about that? So God sent a love note in one little pronoun. Little pronoun that was left in there, and it's opened up a whole way of thinking about this marvelous story. and they think Mary's role was suppressed. And Mary's role was suppressed. Yes.
I think we actually, I think we actually had a sermon about that about 12, 15 months ago. It was very interesting. It was entitled The Two Marys. And I still have a copy of it and whatever at the house because it was fascinating and whatever. And so it's interesting that, you know, multiple folks know about this, obviously, or whatever, and it has become not just a lore, but it is part of our understanding of the Bible now, right?
Thank you.
So that's a good example of what you were talking about, how traditions change and our interpretations change over time. And someone actually tried to change our interpretation or whatever, for sure, deliberately, which is a whole can of worms and whatever when discussing the scriptures.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, it actually affected how that set of stories then. And I just completed working with Emmanuel UCC at Sebring. And that's a whole nother story. That's a great church. Anyway, so working with them and intentionally, but also seeing that really works of how women were significant in the set of stories that goes from after the death of John the Baptist. Jesus now, his focus is preparing himself, but also his disciples for what happens after Jerusalem. He knows it's like Martin Luther King. They're gonna do that to me. So he's oriented on Jerusalem, but will the disciples get it? And here's another discovery. Here's a discovery that I made just as a storyteller. So I can't claim the same authority as the student who found this obscure text, you know, back in the 2nd century, where there was something that gave her a clue that God left this little love note, you know, by a mistake, you know, down through the centuries. But here's something that maybe came from also working with open and affirming congregations, and where I'm at now with that, and understanding that, and that's so important for us to find a unified field theory for our theologies, liberation theology for gay people, for Black feminists. We got to work this together, because we've got to start, particularly with UCC congregations, we've got to start winning people over to, you know, this is a legitimate way of thinking about what it means to be a Christian, and then to be able to speak truth to the power of conservative Christians who said, read it in the Bible and that's it, and it fits in that box and that's it, and there we go. But no, wait a minute now. Jesus is always jumping out of that box. And so in this discovery actually goes back to something, a sermon that disturbed me from years before. And I was working at a psych hospital, but I would go to this Episcopal church, they were literally open and affirming at the time. And although there wasn't a term for it, but that's what they were. And they had invited this preacher. He was an African-American professor, and he told the story about the Greek woman who challenges Jesus, you know, and Jesus says, you know, it's not right to throw the children's food to the dogs, right? You're familiar with that story. And I remember being really upset. Well, wait a minute now. What you know, my thinking was that, well, Jesus was kind of setting the disciples up. I'm going to do a little, you know, we'll play off of their prejudices and do a little, you know, turn the tables here on this. But his position was that Jesus was prejudiced, and the woman challenged him. Well, since then, I'm looking at this story. I think he's right. Okay, and it begins with this. Okay, Mark chapter 7, verse 14, begins with Jesus saying call the whole crowd together, and he says, listen to me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that comes from outside of someone that goes into them makes them unacceptable as a person. But what comes out of someone is what can contaminate them. And then he goes to the home where you're staying as a guest, and his disciples ask him, did you explain this parable? He's like, oi, not you all too. And then he goes and he does this list of all these terrible things that come out of a person's heart. That's his point. It's where evil schemes are hatched. And he left off one thing. Well, okay, the disciples weren't getting it. The Galilean Jews weren't getting it. And the Herodians and the Pharisees were out to get him. So he goes north across the border to Lebanon. And that's where this Syrophoenician woman says, please help my daughter. She's got a demon. And Jesus, he has this, uses this epithet and makes you think that, how come this Syrophoenician woman is coming to me for help and I can't even get my own people to figure it out? And they want to kill me. What if there was that kind of emotion? It doesn't say that in the Bible. We gloss over that. And then she says, yeah, Lord, but those children are waiting on the table. Those puppies are waiting on the table where those careless babies letting the food fall, letting that food fall. And he's like, your words cut to the truth. Go ahead home. Your daughter is freed from that demon. And sure enough, she goes home and the demon is gone. And the girl is resting on her bed. And then he crosses over into Greco-Roman territory. Now, Greco-Roman, okay, so Lebanon was still Roman territory, but there was Phoenician, Syrian folk. And then in the east is the Greco-Romans, caters to the Greco-Roman culture. And they call it the 10 cities, the Decapolis. But this is a remote region that's wilderness where they go. They're not staying at anybody's home. But somebody brings somebody to him, and he says, he's deaf, and this fellow is deaf and mute. And he's like, okay. And he takes that person aside, away from the other people, and he does this elaborate thing of sticking his finger in the guy's ears and gets him to spit, and he says, Ephatha. He sighs to heaven, but he says to this guy, Ephatha, be opened. The guy can speak and he can hear, and there's this marvelous thing that happens. And it's like what he needed. He needed to open up his ministry. It's no longer just for the Jewish community. It's still for the Jewish community, but it's now for everybody. He had to make that jump. And then what happens is thousands of people show up looking for help or to listen to him. And he says, there's all these folks here, and they're starving. We got to, what do you guys suggest? Well, where are we going to get any bread out in this wilderness? And he says, well, how many loaves of bread do you have? Well, I got 7. He says, bring them here to me. And he tells everybody to sit down on the ground, and he feeds 4,000 people. Although they didn't count the women and children in this either, so I'm sure. And then pretty much he sends them away, and then he and the disciples get in the boat, and that's the end of the story. Except that the last time we heard of the place called the Decapolis was when Jesus had an earlier sea voyage, had encountered a man who was crazed. He had a legion of demons. And he heals this man, and the man says to him, let me just stay with you. And Jesus says, go home to your loved ones. And to some extent, Jesus was dealing with, I can't have all these guys that I've healed from evil spirits. They're going to start thinking, which did happen. They started accusing him. And so whether it was by intention, he sends this guy, he says, go home to your loved ones. Tell them what God has done for you. Well, he goes home, and in time he goes forth throughout the Decapolis and tells people about what Jesus had done for him. And so that man is not credited, but he was a missionary. And so all those people were ready. So do you see how these things, how there's stuff that works if you dig down into it? And even kind of thinking cinematically how this all works together and how dramatic it can be. Anyway, so there's a lot of, you can follow these trails out. There's more I could say about that, but what do you think? What do you think about what I've talked about? About creative ways to either look at scripture, but also in how, and I got some ideas for what do we do now, but let me hear back from you. What do you all think about this?
I've always thought of the Bible as a story. My, I can't say that I'm of a Christian faith, but I have a faith of humanity. And I feel like these stories have been useful for us to identify what is possible, and that Jesus, the story, is to be able to say that we are capable of doing the things that he did. That's why the story, that he came here to show that we can be like that. So the current state of affairs in this country and the world, I had been a city commissioner, so I've got this different idea of our civic duty. And I feel that there's, bad things happen when good people do nothing, but great things happen when good people do things together. And so I really find this community here at UCG better together, and just so many of the ways that when there's something happening in the community and I see how UCG shows up, I am just so proud to be a part of that community. But we have to find a way to give more pushback at our state level, our local level. And we've got some people here who are really great about organizing the pushback.
Ah.
And it's growing, but it sure needs it needs something of all faiths to find that they can do this together. And just the irony that so many religious people find a political leader to be God's chosen one. I think it was chosen by, if there was a chosen God's role in that he was put there to show us to wake up. Don't let this continue to be the path.
Yeah. Thank you. What is your first name? Helen. Thank you, Helen.
I want to reply a little on that or build on that, because I am an organizer in the
She's the one I was talking about.
and but I'm thinking that UCG maybe could reach out to other churches, and maybe we could involve the churches of Gainesville more in pro-democracy, no dictatorship, certainly no Hitler.
United Churches of Gainesville.
Maybe we can talk and figure out, like we could start with asking churches, congregations to come on June 14th. That's going to be a national something. Oh,
Carol Barron here. I'd like to join it with our church group that deals with hurricanes. There be a group. So we just, so we've already got the group here. We're all preparing now because today is the day. It starts hurricane season. So let's get on the democracy road.
They can do. How about that?
Kind of building on what you have said and what the other ladies have said here too. I actually began to establish a narrative on my own a number of years ago before actually becoming a member of UCG. I had Jehovah's Witnesses knock on the door and asked to come in, and I said, "Yeah, come on in. We'll talk." My dad was a scientist, and there's a big gap here. Let's try to go ahead and reason and resolve that gap. And so we had every week except during COVID, we couldn't meet during that time. Very, very intense discussions, not arguments, discussions, question and answer type things. And I credit these folks for getting me to actually sit down and read the Bible, beginning with page 1. And so part of that narrative was in the beginning, everyone says, man was created in the image of God. Well, I looked at that word, image. Well, that could mean shadow. It doesn't have to mean that we are identical to God or look like God. God could be overshadowing us and whatever as we speak. And so I carry that with me. That's part of my narrative now.
Oh,
And and the other point is that this came in a discussion with folks who are 80% parallel to what we talk about here at UCG and believe in, okay? 20% completely different, for sure. But it was that dynamic of sitting down and talking with those folks and whatever that began to help me as an individual begin to establish that narrative, which is, I think, part of your theme today and whatever, and is very important in whatever in doing that. So not only in terms of a group type of thing is it important, but it's also important for individuals, one-on-one, person, eyeball to eyeball, person to person, in a comfortable setting and whatnot. I would go to their churches after a while. I was afraid I'd embarrass myself and them. But in the home and whatever, as they did in ancient times and whatever, house to house. Okay.
yeah.
And so I that's why I came today, because I resonate with that theme and whatever, because it makes such a difference in whatever, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is my first Sunday here in 30 years. That is put me on a journey. But I spent 30 years on the other side of a rigid faith. And partly due to circumstances with my family and partly due to, I think, my gray hairs, I have no problem with questions. I'm also a Jersey girl, so I have no problem.
All right.
I've been on a 2-month journey of visiting other churches, and there are quite a few very like-minded, like-hearted, affirming churches in Gainesville. But maybe we differ in style, maybe we differ in song, but I am noticing that all of them seem to be extremely gray hair. Oh. And there's a thing there. There's something where our stories aren't resonating to a younger generation. We're losing that connection with them. And I'm not saying that the more rigid ones are doing any better at this, honestly, but they don't give their kids opportunities to venture out. So I can see what you're saying, and I think we need to do that. We need to be in communication with and inviting to these other church bodies that are already affirming, already in this mode. I mean, I last week it was Trinity Metropolitan, and I've been to Westminster Presbyterian and one of the Episcopal churches over here in town. There are a Maison. I've been to Maison, so we have communities, but we're and Sunday morning we're very segregated. Somehow we have to cross that.
Yeah.
I came here because I was going to PFLAG meetings, and there were a number of people here, and I was invited to come. Plus, when my church closed, I felt very liberated, and I wrote down, because finding an affirming congregation was number one on my list.
I'd love to hear what other churches you have found.
Well, I want to write them down.
After this is over, I'm going to come and ask all those and we could brainstorm too.
So it can be done. And I think that the stories, I love the idea of the story. The stories are great. Bible stories are the greatest. I love the Bible. And I love especially the women in the Bible. I have a certain proclivity there. But I think it's a lot of those stories and talking about the heart and generosity of Jesus to reach out to people that typically get ignored or cast aside would resonate with our younger people as well. If we told them as stories rather than you have to believe this way and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, I want to say that I think all of the deep religions, well, just, it just dawns on me that, I mean, we have we've chosen or grew up with Jesus as the Bible as our guide. And it seems to me when I've studied other religions, it's exactly the same. That there's the depth of Hinduism is very similar. It has different images and everything, but it's really very similar, as is Judaism when you go to the depth of it, as is I don't know well, it's not called Muslimism. Islam, thank you. I'm sorry about that.
No.
I don't know it so well, but my guess is that the Sufi part of it, the depth of it, is the same message. My guess is I don't that everyone, even Taoism, which they wouldn't have considered exactly a religion, but it's pretty darn similar. It's a way of life. They all seem to me to have the same depth. And so we could eat, and I love that we have our depth. But it's pretty easy to not go there, to not go to the depth. So I'm really happy that we have a congregation that likes going to the depth.
Well said.
Very good. Very good. Just say this, my experience of interfaith work in the villages, if you can imagine this. And what we did, remember the guy who was going to burn Korans in this area? I think the word went out through National Council of Churches, invite somebody from another faith to read scripture from their tradition. Well, I was ready for this. And I got the local rabbi and an imam who worked in the interfaith community there and invited them to the church. We had a common theme. And for 7 years, we did this. Jewish call to worship, the Barku, the Muslim call to prayer, the Adhan, and lighting the third candle of the Advent wreath. And then we wove in the prayers. We did Our Father, Son, Holy Spirit, whatever, but whatever the appropriate prayers were for them. And then each of us spoke we had scripture in a brief homily, and it worked. We did this 7 years. And then Pulse happened. And a Catholic lay leader who worked with faith development with the adults put a call out, to do a prayer service. And that became, we had like 600 people showing up at the big Catholic church in the villages. And I think we did 4 or 5 of these things. And we introduced the Muslims and the Jewish folk doing their part of that thing. They had a different format. They also included, it was kind of it was a lot more a broader base in terms of religions that participated. And I think there were maybe 4 or 5 times. We even did it at the really conservative Methodist church. And so there was we had some great experiences with that, but these things only last as long as the clergy are committed, that they are friends and trust each other. That's how it works. Get the leaders to trust each other, you can get away with a lot of good stuff, a lot of good trouble. And you have a wealth of all kinds of folks. I mean, you're certainly going to have a smorgasbord of all the kind of religions here because of UF. And the thing is, find some way to connect and get the clergy. And in fact, Donna Shopper was part of a trialogue. Has she talked about that? Yeah, and I heard her speak this. Please.
I think, if I remember correctly, that there's always been a minister here that goes to some kind of a gathering or an organization, what?
Used to be.
Lunch? No, there's an organization of all the different faiths and ministers that used to gather together for an occasional meeting, maybe a monthly meeting. I don't know. I remember Andy going to it, and I assume, I don't know if that's continued, but there's already something out there that to connect other churches.
There are two groups. There has been a division within the local interfaith alliance. And earlier this year, I was at one of the interfaith alliances at Temple Shir Shalom, and there are only about 7 faiths represented there. But there's another alliance that's got more of the more traditional. There was a split because of our open and affirming, and that any community had an open and affirming to the LGBT community. So some of the more traditional rock-based congregations separated, and there became 2 groups.
Not the hurricane.
Not the hurricane group. We take them all. Well, but there's only about 15, 20 of them yet, out of 200. That's well.
Well, let me just do just interject this. I feel it's important to back up our stand and come from the tradition, even if it means reinterpreting it. And here's another discovery I made. And that was with the story of Jesus transfigured, coming down. He says, who do people say that I am? And they're all over the map on this. So he says, okay, Peter, James, and John, we go up to the mountain, and there's this remarkable demonstration, and Jesus is revealed for who he is. And he comes down the mountain, and he tells them, the Son of Man must suffer and die, but on the 3rd day rise. They get to the bottom of the hill, and there's this group, they're all arguing with the disciples. And they all, oh, it's Jesus. They all run up, and he says, what were you arguing about with them? And then this man says, well, I brought my son to you, and he has a voice-stealing spirit, and your disciples couldn't handle it. And he berates them, and then he says, bring the child to me. And they bring the child to him. The child has this convulsions, epilepsy. And the story goes that Jesus heals the boy. And the disciples asked him, why could we not cast it out? And he says to them, in words to this effect, such an enemy as this cannot be driven out by anything but prayer and fasting, faith and hard work. But here's something I discovered, or I've thought about this. What if Jesus realized that he hadn't been told the whole story? I brought my son to you, and wherever it sees him, it throws him down to fire and to water to destroy him. Asked your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. What if, and with demon possession, Dominic Crossan says that why are there so many demon-possessed people in the New Testament and virtually none in the Old? Why is that? And he thinks it's like a literary device for dealing with Roman oppression. What happens in an empire when you're forcing people to conform, when society forces you to conform? What if that child was not a son, but was really a daughter? And what if it means that how we understand Jesus' saving work is that he helps get at root problems. He's intuitive enough to see what's going on. He is intuitive enough to challenge and it literally then is an evil spirit of fear, deception, hatred, conformity that provokes health conditions, stress that provokes some physical, So what Dominic, so do you see that there are some practical things, if we dig down, that's possible? Now, of course, this would probably not, and even I'd have to be very careful about any kind of congregation and how I preface it, or my assumption is, first of all, that demonic possession serves as a literary device for empire oppression, that Jesus' work, blessings, the Jesus work, it's okay, it's okay. So Jesus' work of how do we understand his saving work? It's to help people to be whole, to be who they are. And then the third thing is it's not a question of valuing male over female. It's about helping people to become, to be honestly, to be healed with truth and love.
Which is hard enough.
Yeah. So even if it's incorrect, okay, if it's not literally the way it should be interpreted, nevertheless, that it's still true. Does that make sense?
And working off of what you just said and whatever, that was part of my reasoning for talking with the witnesses, was to just establish a balance between the spiritual and the rational and whatever, because once that imbalance goes one way or the other and whatever, it causes problems and whatever. And we call mentally insane people unbalanced and whatever. And so that's a way of restoring balance. But the other thing I wanted to get to was even back in the apostles and in the old disciples and ancient disciples, there was dissension. Each of them wanted to be the chosen, as you alluded to earlier. And that seems to be a theme throughout history and whatever, and also something that separates denominations, is that we had to be the chosen ones, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Baptists, the Methodists to some degree and whatever, the Puritans and whatever. They were the chosen ones and whatever. They had the answer, and God favored them, the Israelites, as well. And sometimes at UCG and whatever, to be honest with you. So I think there's a mindset there that maybe there ain't no chosen people. God loves everyone, for sure.
Or we're chosen to be unique and we can work together. The common spirit is love.
Dar can't leave till we leave. So
What's that?
she's our keeper of the campus.
Okay, so
To be done, but go ahead.
I just, my closing remark here. I do have a set of these stories. You can check them out. And so I do that. Here's an idea of something that I've been doing on my own. I went to the local arts council and I came up with this idea. 2-page read in. Share 2 pages of a favorite book by reading it aloud to others who likewise have a favorite book to share with you. Do this in a library, bookstore, church, or coffee shop. This might be a way to reach those kids. You know, say, hey, we're doing this, or here's an idea. You guys do it, you know? And so I'm going to leave this with whoever would be interested. That too, put that there. And then the other thing.
Maybe we can do this in the small group thing this fall. Someone can lead this.
Don't wait till the fall. It'd be a fun thing to do now. Get everybody, just do it with your friends. Make copies of it.
Yes, but I could do it. We could do it organizedly.
Do it organized. But here's another thing. Epic readings. That might be a thing where you invite people here. They have a great sound system. We did an epic reading with the African American community, Royal. It was actually one of the few surviving communities, 40 acres and a mule, literally. And 2 churches in that community, my church, we got together, we did an epic reading of the Gospel of Mark, but then we did Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And then we did Frederick Douglass' speech, What is the 4th of July to the Slave? How did people learn? How did they teach the kids? You know, they told them stories. They got them to listen, you know, to stuff like this. And here's another thing. Now in the time of book banning, Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
I broke it down into 28 readings. It takes 6 hours to do with the break. You got to get permission and pay a nominal fee. And it's a great read. And you did it, they did it downtown here as a play. So I'll leave this here too.
Thank you, Really.
Thank you. Shall we have a prayer? Okay, here's how we'll do it. We'll do it like they do with a youth group. You get us, well, we're not going to hold hands, but I'll just say, call out a word, say something brief, or you don't say anything at all. Just listen. But I'll start off and I'll say amen. Okay, here it goes. Gracious God, this is a great church. Help them to be a light in this community as they already are, just to continue to be an example for that beloved community that is yet possible.
Unity in difference.
Bring joy to us.
We're better together.
God have ever known.
Thank you for this opportunity to share, to listen, to grow as we learn all there is to learn and how to be our true selves.
Oh, and 50501.
Wrap the ill in bandages of love.
Thank you.
Amen. Well, I mean, let the people say amen. There's a voice from above.
Just.
Thank you, Gary.